Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session of our virtual Credit Outlook conference. My name is Raja Kalra. I'm an Assistant Vice President at DPRS Morningstar and a member of the Diversified Industries Group. In this session, I'll be a moderator as we turn the spotlight on the ESG initiatives being undertaken by the Canadian Railways, which are continuously evolving to be more sustainable. Railways are typically characterized as being the least fuel-intensive form of freight transportation, especially when compared to trucking. Nonetheless, Canadian railways are committed to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions and achieving science-based carbon intensity reduction targets. Furthermore, as government-mandated blend of renewable fuel increases over time, Canadian railways are thinking about the impact on fuel efficiency and the locomotive itself. To achieve these goals and other ESG considerations, companies have adopted policies to be more sustainable. Canadian National Railway Company, CN, is a leader in fuel efficiency among its North American peers. In particular, the company has made notable progress over the years in reducing the use of locomotives through increasing train lengths and train weights, mainly through the early adoption of precision scheduled railroading. CN has invested heavily in technology, including autonomous train inspection programs and automated inspection portals, which help it better maintain its infrastructure and the safety and sustainability of its network. We are pleased to have with us today Chantal Desprez, Assistant Vice President of Sustainability at CN. Chantal will provide insight into CN's strategy, plans, and goals for more sustainable operations. Chantal will also share her views on the leading technology that CN and other industry participants are using to improve the safety and sustainability of network. In addition, Chantal will discuss CN's plan for growing diversity, including gender parity at various levels of the organization. By way of background, Chantal leads CN's sustainability strategy. She works closely with internal and external stakeholders to advance sustainable supply chain solutions and drive long-term stakeholder value creation. She's a volunteer and a member of the board of Al Gore's Climate Reality Project Canada and was named Canada's Clean 50 and Clean 16 in 2015 in recognition for her contribution to sustainable development and clean capitalism. Chantal holds a bachelor's in business administration from the University of Moncton, New Brunswick, and a master's in marketing from the University of Sherbrooke, Quebec. We have set aside 45 minutes for this session. During the first 30 minutes, I'll be asking her prepared ESG-related questions, which will be followed by an open Q&A session moderated by my colleague, Connie Sobers, where an audience can submit questions for Chantal through the Q&A box that you see on the Zoom platform. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be available for replay afterwards. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Chantal. Most welcome.
Good morning, Raja. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So just to kick off, I would like to start off by asking your role as a leader of sustainability at CN. If you could offer your perspective on the purpose and scope of this position.
Right. I've been on this journey for about 13 years now and come from the commercial side of the business at CN and approaching my 25 years of service with the company. So a longtime railroader. Currently, my responsibilities include, leading the sustainability strategy and agenda inside our company. I'm the company's very first sustainability lead. And again, I've been at it for about 13 years. And in terms of my team and what we're responsible for, aside from strategy, we do handle all of our sustainability disclosures, which hopefully many people in the audience have looked at. So our sustainability report and data supplement that talks about our performance and our outlook on these topics. We also do our decarbonization strategy. We lead the company's climate change strategy and disclosures on that topic as well. And we also engage internally and externally our stakeholders in ESG programs. So in a nutshell, those are the kind of the key areas of responsibility. And as you mentioned, in the introduction, sustainability is a team sport. So a lot of collaboration across the organization and also outside of the organization. Sustainability is not something that really resides in a team. It requires a whole organization to move ahead and a lot of collaboration. And then the issues that we're all tackling globally, like climate change or diversity and inclusion, require us to partner also outside of our organization. So I like to say that it's a team sport with a lot of players involved, and we're just the enablers or the facilitators of that inside our company.
Thank you. So you mentioned climate change. If you could talk about your climate action plan and then also your decarbonization targets, that would be great.
Yes, a topic near and dear to my heart. So at CN, we've been on this journey of decarbonization for a very long time. And a lot of the work that we do has been informed by our partnership with the CDP. And through that partnership with the CDP, in 2016, we embarked on this journey of setting a science-based target. So aligning with the climate science. And in 2017, we're very proud to be amongst the first 100 companies in the world to have an approved science-based target through our collaborations with the CDP and the SBTI. So these science-based targets, align with these pretty steep curves of decarbonization that we have to follow to avoid catastrophic kind of impacts on our planet due to climate change. In 2017, our target was 29% reduction by 2030, based on 2015 levels. And we're progressing towards that target quite well. In the last year, we've reworked or recollaborated with the Science Based Target Initiative to set a new science-based target. And there were really two key drivers for us to need to do that. Number one is the recent acquisition a few years ago of TransX. They're a trucking company, and they impact our fuel burn and our carbon scope 1 emissions. And number two is in 2018, the IPCC came out with a new seminal report on climate change that informed the world that keeping global warming to 2 degrees Celsius was going to be too catastrophic, that indeed we needed to pull back and keep global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. And even to this day, we're now talking about 1.5 degrees Celsius, which means that these target setting tools, these curves that we need to follow to decarbonize to 2030 got even sharper. So the new target that we've now gotten approved by the SBTI that we have in place is 43% carbon intensity improvement by 2030 based on 2019 levels. So quite ambitious targets for decarbonization that we need to act upon.
Okay. And as the government mandated the proportion of renewable fuel increases over time, what's your plan to update the power units?
Right. So this 43% target, right, has a variety of levers that we're going to need to pull to get there, of which the greater use of renewable fuels is one. But maybe before I talk about that, I'll talk to you a little bit about the other lever, which is the one we've been focused on for the last couple of decades. The first lever that we're going to continue to pull to get to this 43% target is our continued focus on locomotive fuel efficiency. The second lever will be the greater use of renewable fuels. In this first kind of lever of efficiency, what we have as an organization is a very solid track record. And you've talked a little bit, Raja, in your opening remarks about precision scheduled railroading. CN was a pioneer of precision scheduled railroading, which allows us to pull a lot more freight, basically in a nutshell, with fewer assets. And the fewer assets we use to pull all of that freight, the less fuel we burn, which makes us a lot more carbon efficient. And to this day, CN remains 15% more fuel efficient than the industry average. And we've improved our fuel intensity and carbon intensity performance by over 40% over the last couple of decades. So this is a game that we've been in for a long time. It's good business to manage well your carbon because carbon is energy and energy has a cost. But that's been a big driver for us in our business. And despite the fact that we've been at this for a couple of decades, we still feel that we can pull this lever of efficiency over the next decade to get us to 2030. Some of the ways that we're going to keep extracting more efficiency out of this locomotive system that we operate is new technology. So the locomotives that we're buying today when we renew our fleets are much more fuel efficient than the locomotives are 10, 15, 20 years ago. And as assets, these locomotives, when we buy them, we want to run them for a long time. It's sustainable to keep your assets to the end of life, and locomotives last a long time. We use our locomotives for 20, 30 plus years after we buy them. So these new locomotives, again, are better. And then in terms of some of the fleets that we're operating, we can also add technologies to them that make them more fuel efficient and more carbon efficient, like anti-idling technology, for example. We're also leveraging data telemetry system, so the information collection systems on our locomotives that are informing then the next areas where we can tackle bringing in more efficiency. One of these information systems is HPTA, and that's an in-house built tool that draws upon all of this data that we're collecting as we're running our locomotives, that allows us to match the horsepower to the tonnage of the freight that we're pulling. So some of you might have noticed when you see a train, rolling by in your neighborhoods or in your communities, that there's a locomotive at the front end of the train, and then there might be a locomotive somewhere in the middle. Those are what we refer to as power units, and they're there to pull all of the freight that we're pulling across the country. HPTA allows us to control that second power unit and only use that power when we need it. So if we're going up hills, or depending on the terrain, or depending on the head haul versus the back haul when we're coming back, the weight and the freight that we're pulling may differ. If we're able to turn off that second locomotive, which we do sometimes, then it's not burning fuel, which allows us to conserve that fuel and therefore reduce our carbon footprint. So these are some of the ways that, again, we're kind of embarking on this continued journey of efficiency, leveraging technology, and then converting that to operating practices. And I always like to use the example of ourselves with our vehicles. We may all, for example, drive, a Honda Civic, but some of us might be consuming more fuel with the same vehicle than others. And that's where the human aspect or operating practices really kick in. So you can have the best technology in the world, but how you use that technology efficiently, how you drive your car, how fast stopping and starting, and all of those behaviors also have an impact. So those behaviors, the technology, data telemetry system, and these new locomotives are the levers that we're pulling that will help us continue on this journey of fuel efficiency, which is good business. Less fuel, less cost of the business. And then that other lever, the fifth lever that we're pulling to get ourselves to this 43% decarbonization target that informs our climate action plan, is the greater use of renewable fuels. So currently in Canada, we have a renewable fuel standard in place, which means that when we're buying fuel, it's blended 2% renewables. And that regulation applies to the fuel producers that are importing or producing fuel in Canada. So it's not a regulation that applies to the railroad, but it is a regulation that indirectly impacts the railroad. In some jurisdictions that we operate, above and beyond the renewable fuel standard, there are clean fuel standards. And our federal government in Canada has also announced a federal clean fuel standard to come in place in 2022. These clean fuel standards call for the decarbonizing of diesel fuel through the greater use of renewables. So this lever that we're going to pull is going to be impacted by these regulations. So we foresee that by 2030, the blending of renewable fuels in the diesel fuel that we procure will be at levels between 10, 15%, because the carbon intensity of these fuels need to continuously come down under these regulations. And so that's going to greatly help us further achieve our 43% target. It's not going to be enough. We're going to need to buy more renewable fuels than what will be included in the regulation. But these are really these efficiency levers and these new renewable, cleaner fuels coming on the market is really what's going to allow us to reach that 43% intensity goal that we've set, or target that we've set for ourselves in 2030.
Sure. And fuel efficiency is also a key metric when we look at credit ratings for the railways, because it's such a meaningful component of your overall operating expenses. Now, you mentioned about technology to improve your carbon intensity reduction goals. You're also using technology for safety, improving the infrastructure. If you could talk a little bit about what's on the core or forefront of technology in terms of improving infrastructure and making the network more sustainable.
Absolutely. And the safety story, Raja, is very similar to the decarbonization story. There's a lot of innovation happening in our world. So there's these fantastic kind of new technologies. We live in a world where we're collecting a lot of more information. We have capabilities for big data and even artificial intelligence, for example. And then there's the human aspect of what we do, right? So how do we make sure that people are leveraging these technologies to drive efficiency and also safety? So that safety journey is very similar. It's a journey about how do we make sure that this is embedded in our corporate culture, that everybody has a feeling for and understand what it means to be safe. And so we have programs around that, like looking out for each other, for example, where we team people up to keep them safe. That, combined with innovation and technology as well, is going to help us. And in terms of innovative technologies, there are two maybe that I'll talk to you a little bit more about today. One is ATIP cars. And these rail cars are rail cars that we can add on to our trains that provide us an opportunity to inspect the track as we're rolling and moving stock across the country. So these technologies, again, use sensors and are able to really inspect and look at the tracking system that we're running on as we're operating these ATIP cars. The other key technology that we're employing is inspection portals. So where the ATIP cars are really inspecting the rail that the rolling stock is moving on, the inspection portals, and you can think of them literally as a portal that the train will then run through, inspects all of the equipment and rail cars and locomotives going through them. And it's kind of like a 360-degree view of cameras and data collection information that allows us to see even the undercarriage of the rail cars and the locomotives that are passing through these portals. So really fascinating, and I think an exciting technology that leverages kind of like how we think about and inspect our tracks with these ATIP cars, and then how we think about and better understand the risks around the equipment itself, the rail cars and the locomotives through these kind of, again, inspection portals. So very exciting time. And again, these technologies are pulling data live, big data sets, and we're looking at big data analysis to better understand running these simulations and running them through to isolate and be able to detect issues that could cause problems in the future. So this is really forward-looking information that allows us to better manage and operate a safe railroad today.
Thanks for that. Just in terms of diversity, so CN has been a signatory to Catalyst Accords since 2017, and you've made progress on the vote front. What's your plan for the executive management team and rest of the company? Because railways are typically there's more male employees, historically. So if you could talk about that in terms of diversity and gender parity, that would be great.
Yes, and I mean, I have to, we have to be, honest on this one. We have, a ways to go in terms of inclusion and diversity, at CN, and as you mentioned, in the railway sector, which has traditionally been, very male dominated. Our perspective on diversity and inclusion is that it kind of starts at the top of the house. And that's why we became a signatory to the Catalyst Accord in 2017, setting that target of at least 30% representation of women on the board of directors. And I'm glad to say that we set the target in 2017 and were able to meet that target in 2017. And then recently, in the last few years, we became a signatory to the Catalyst Accord 2022. And that accord, is about maintaining these levels of 30% at the board level, but then pushing it down through the organization, as you mentioned, Raja, looking at then the next level, which is the executive leadership team. And so again, this is a 30% target that we're pushing through and down at the executive level. So right now we sit at about 17% representation of women at the executive level. So that's 6 women out of a total of about 35 executives. So we still have a bit of ways to go, but in terms of the scope and number, it's a few more that would get us to be able to achieve this target of 30% female representation. At the board level, the new target is for gender parity, and we're at 44% right now representation of women. And I think, the important issue to talk about, in terms of diversity is that we all understand that, we need to look beyond just gender diversity in our organizations. And that's certainly something that we're, tackling and thinking about at CN. So broader than just female representation. What do our working groups look like? Are people prepared to self-identify? We have questionnaires, and we're trying to better understand what is the full diversity of our workforce so that we can include everybody and think about diversity in a broader sense of not just gender diversity. So that's, it's work, and I have to say, not easy work, even for all organizations, where we need to build these cultures of inclusion where people feel that they're okay with divulging, what groups they belong to, so that we can get that baseline data and understanding. Ultimately, our goal is to look like the communities where we operate. And we operate a network across North America, across many different communities. If I just think of myself growing up in Atlantic Canada, that the makeup of people who live there is very different, for example, than the makeup of the people who live in Memphis, which is another key area where CN operates. So that's how we're thinking about it. What is our network? What are the communities where we operate look like? And our goal, again, is to kind of look a lot more like the communities where we operate. I also just want to touch base just also quickly on the topic of Indigenous peoples and the importance as well that we place on that group and the representation of that group in our workforce as well. So when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, we're thinking about Indigenous people as well, and hiring them on and having them work in our company. As an organization, we have a long history with Indigenous communities across North America. We actually operate across a couple hundred Indigenous communities with our rail network operations. And so they're a very important stakeholder group for us as well.
Sure. I'll ask you one more question before we open it up for the Q&A. CN did a sustainability-linked loan structure, one of the largest in Canada. If you could talk a little bit, what prompted you to do that, and how it's linked to various targets.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, it's been a great journey for me professionally. I started this work about 13 years ago, where we're just trying to baseline information and understand kind of where we stood on some of these topics. You know, what is our carbon footprint and our waste footprint, and how are we performing on diversity and inclusion, to where we are today, which is we're now looking at new types of financial instruments, and it's being integrated into financing, which is extremely exciting. So these sustainability linked loans are really an opportunity to mobilize, you know, funds towards more sustainable activity and more sustainable development around the world. And the interest, I guess, is linked to our strategies and our performance and some of our longer term targets. And that's the strength on both sides. So for the structure of our sustainability linked loan, it, you know, we discussed and linked it back to our science-based target, for example. So as an organization, we've been lucky enough to kind of stand out in this sector and be part of the leading companies around the world to set this path and do well in terms of you know, moving in that kind of a direction. And so those are the criteria that we were thinking about as we developed the sustainability linked loan, is looking at our performance and linking the performance. So our performance to this target is actually linked back to this loan and the rate that will be achieved, as well as our fuel efficiency. And so building on these kind of solid track records, and then the outlook and these aggressive targets that we've set for ourselves into these financial instruments. So we live in very interesting times where I can say, at least for my journey, finally, the funds that are required to transform the world in a more sustainable way are being mobilized around the world.
Yeah, no, that's great. So we spoke about, you know, the climate, we spoke about technology. I think what we will do is I'll hand over to my colleague, Connie Sobers, and she'll open it up for Q&A.
Fantastic, that's great.
Perfect. Thank you, Raja, and thank you, Chantel. This has definitely been a very insightful conversation. So we will move to the Q&A portion. So folks listening, please feel free to submit some questions. We have one here. So if you could talk to the various initiatives and programs, including those on the technology front, that are being undertaken at CN, such that the tracks and trains are better maintained to ensure that there are no derailments. We believe that these support better credit quality while being positive to the environment.
Right.
Sorry.
Did you have anything else, Connie? Sorry.
No, yeah, sorry. I don't think that there was I don't know what the question was for that one. So I'll move on to the next one. Sorry. You did mention Indigenous earlier. So on that, CN launched the Indigenous Advisory Council last year, mainly with the aim of advising CN's board of directors on issues that are relevant to CN and its relationship with the 200 plus Indigenous communities in which CN operates. If you could speak to how that program is going and some of the key programs, that would be great.
Great, thanks, Connie. As I touched upon, you know, we operate across, you know, a couple hundred Indigenous communities across North America. So we have a long-standing relationships with Indigenous people across these many communities. A few years back, we decided to work with PAR, and that is Progressive Aboriginal Relations. And what PAR has provided for us is really a great framework to think about, you know, how we move forward strategically in establishing better relationships with Indigenous peoples. The PAR program really centers around economic reconciliation. And there's kind of three kind of key pillars that we think about that are aligned with PAR. The first one is hiring of Indigenous people. And so we work with our HR teams, and we have also people on the ground that are in communication with Indigenous people in their communities to hire them on to become railroaders and to become part of our company. The second aspect of PAR is really about community relations and community support. And there we're collaborating with the public and government affairs team and looking at sponsorships, donations, and the concrete work that we can do in Indigenous communities. The third pillar is about procurement and thinking about Indigenous companies and including Indigenous companies as we procure products and services across North America. So these three kind of pillars are the foundational kind of strategic pillars when we're thinking about Indigenous relations. And recently, Connie, I think you mentioned the appointment of a council, and they're going to be really there to look at these activities, look at these strategies moving forward, and provide advisory services to the board. And so, this advisory council was just appointed earlier this year and doing their thinking through in terms of the next level of strategy for our organization. But certainly the approach to PAR and how we're thinking about this in terms of hiring again, investing in communities, and then on the procurement side are that kind of those three foundational pillars to how we think about economic reconciliation.
That's excellent. I guess to kind of continue there, do you mind to speak on provide some comments on the company's governance and social performance and some of the future goals for CN?
Right. Well, as I mentioned, with Raja, and I think just with me, with my journey, and it's similar to a lot of sustainability practitioners, 10, 15 years ago, when I embarked on this journey, the big topic and the big area of focus was environmental sustainability. And though, it's been a decade at least, there's been a lot of time, effort, and energy around climate change and what's happening around the world. And then in the last few years and emerging, is we're going to be talking a lot more about the circular economy and waste production and plastics. And so we've been very active, a lot of companies around the environmental issues that we're all facing around the world and advancing in that area. And I think what's been very interesting, and somewhat worrisome, but really interesting that has emerged is the whole social aspect of sustainability is now, much more critical, I think, critically understood than ever before. And so I think, the lessons that have come out of this pandemic are that it's very difficult for countries and organizations to prosper if we do not have healthy people. So the health of people, which is the S of the ESG, part of the S of ESG, is really a driver back to the economics of the business, right? We need to be able to have people healthy enough to work, to move the economy, and then we need businesses to be up and running. And there's been, many impacts around the world economically with the pandemic. So the health of people. And then these big movements that are happening around the world, whether it's the Me Too movement or the Black Lives Matter movement, or what's happening in our Indigenous communities and Truth and Reconciliation in Canada, again, is shining the light on these social issues and how they directly link back to our prosperity as countries again and as organizations. So big rise in terms of the S, and a lot more time and focus and energy, I think, around the world in many companies, including CN, to say, okay, we've worked a lot around the environmental issues, and now we're really seeing the emergence and the importance of social issues and have a lot of work to do around these topics, and covered a little bit of quite frankly, the challenges that we face in terms of diversity and inclusion. I mean, I've been with the company for a long time and looking at the reporting on this topic, and we've never been able to crack the double digits in terms of female representation in our company. And so railroads in North America run around, like we are at 8-9% representation of women in our workforce. So we have a workforce of 23,000, and about 8-9% of those are women. And in the sector, it's pretty average. So we see 8, 9, 10, 11%. And so, that just showcases some of the work that we have to do in our industry. And again, as I talked about, we need to think about diversity and inclusion, much further beyond just the gender topic, to be inclusive of all minority groups. And on that journey, a lot of us that do the work that I do, it's again a data collection exercise, right? When we're hired on by companies, we have the choice to disclose or not what minority groups we might belong to. And so this is a journey of asking for that information, collecting that information, making that information public, and then developing strategies that will allow us to be a lot more diverse. And brings to mind kind of discussions that I've been having in the last year with our new director of diversity and inclusion, and her name is Leslie Ann Lewis, and she's fantastic. I think she was born to do this work. And she would say, I want my title to be inclusion and diversity, because her feeling is that you really need that inclusive environment to build diversity. And so it's important to be able to, have all the voices inside an organization heard and have everybody have a chance to have a seat at the table. And so these are, again, kind of some key aspects on the social area. And of course, for us, and I've touched upon it briefly, the safety aspect is critically important. And that's been, foundational to our business for many, many years. And there again, there's great innovation and technology that we're able to capitalize on. We live in innovative times, and I think that's fascinating. And again, then there's the human aspect of it, which is the culture and the programs that we put in place to make sure that this is embedded in our corporate culture, that we're looking out for each other, that we're thinking about safety every day, and that it's much more than just the technologies that we're able to adopt.
That was excellent. It's really great to hear all of the good work that CN is doing on these initiatives. I'll have one more question here, and this is more on the environment aspect. So many of the world's corporations are pledging to reduce GHG emissions to net zero by 2050. At this point, these pledges seem largely aspirational, but at least milestones are being set. Is CN considering making similar pledges beyond its 2030 target? And if so, what could be the scope of further investment required, and what strategies would be considered to further drive decarbonization of CN's businesses?
Yes, I mean, I can say that, that this science-based target journey that we're on, and, we've had this relationship with the Science-Based Target Initiative and this target that's been approved, these curves, these very steep curves of 43% decarbonization by 2030, these pathways, they all lead to the same place, which is a net zero 50 world. So the curve keeps going beyond 2030 and heads towards zero emissions by 2050. And so what that means, for us in our sector, and I think, hopefully I've made the case pretty clear that we can do a lot with the technology we operate today to decarbonize it significantly by 43% by 2030. And here, what I'll say is that it's a team sport. We operate the locomotives, we don't make them, and we don't make the fuel that goes in them. So this is really about collaboration with the locomotive manufacturer and also the fuel producers. We need to understand how these fuels interact with the technology. And by the same token, in order to achieve a net zero 50 world and this deep decarbonization to zero emissions, we know that we're going to need to move towards no emission or much lower emission alternative propulsion technology. So that means that the discussions are happening now today with locomotive manufacturers and in the sector to be thinking about what is the rail technology of the future and what does the locomotive of the future look like. On that, we have a long-standing relationship in our sector with Transport Canada. We have a memorandum of understanding that's been in place for over 20 years. And the agreement there has been self-regulation around air emissions, and in the later years around greenhouse gas emissions as well. And the numbers there are quite spectacular, similar to the numbers that I gave you about CN, reductions of like 40% in the areas of air emissions and 40% in the area of greenhouse gas emissions over the last 20 years or so as a sector. So great kind of track work that's been done. In the last round of the memorandum, and these are renewed and on a 5-year basis, the discussion with transport became about a pathway to decarbonize the rail sector in our country. So reaching out to the government saying, we need to collaborate in the sector with you and other ministries in Canada to figure out what this pathway is going to look like. And this is now becoming more clear, and hopefully I've been able to illuminate a part of it today, right? Efficiency is part of that pathway, cleaner fuels are part of that pathway, and alternative propulsion is also part of that pathway. And beyond, locomotives in our operations, we operate all kinds of other equipment. And when we're thinking about decarbonization of our whole company, we're thinking about electrification. And we're thinking about it as well in waves. And, as you very well probably already know, we have electric vehicles. So the smaller batteries that we need to operate electric cars are now available. And then that's extending to heavier trucks. So Ford, for example, has announced an electric F-150 that will be coming onto the market. So a little bit bigger batteries, but coming on. CN has partnered with Lion Electric, which is a company based out of Montreal, and they're custom building heavy duty trucks that will help us, pull freight that will be electric powered. And then, there'll be the alternative kind of propulsion technology for rail that will be developed. So in terms of pathway to deep decarbonization, which we need by 2050, then that includes electrification of all of these different technologies that we use in our business, and then the thinking through at the industry level and with our partners, our locomotive manufacturers, of what will be the alternative propulsion of the future. And I wish I could tell you, and quite frankly, some of you might be aware, right? CP has announced their pilot project. They're going to be looking at hydrogen. We have US railroads looking at battery electric locomotives. So there's different technologies that are evolving. Some of them are even available around the world, like catenary technology, for example, electrification. And so all of these right now are being looked at. I wish I could tell you which one will emerge in the future as being the technology of the future, but this is part of that pathway work that we're doing with the government of Canada in order to determine, okay, what will this technology of the future will be. So very extremely exciting times, I think, globally around the world and including for the rail sector. If you would have asked me 5 years ago if I would have been having these discussions, I would have said, no, it'll happen, but not in the time of my career. So this is happening even faster than I ever thought it would be. So again, very exciting times.
Thank you, Chantal. I could not agree more. So I think we'll wrap up here. I don't know if yourself or Raja have any last words.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to thank you, Chantal. You shed some really good light on the climate action plan and the path forward towards 2030 and beyond. I think this is very helpful. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you for the opportunity. As I mentioned, these issues that we're facing, globally, all of us are monumental. We live in fascinating times, and I think, the solutions require collaboration of all the players, teamwork. And so I really appreciate this exchange and the opportunity to reach out to your audience today. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Perfect.